So, what happens when a single violent act in a modern city forces a head-on collision between two entirely different worlds of justice? That's exactly what we're diving into today through the absolutely fascinating and complicated case of Matthew Kanyamunyu.
Our story starts somewhere we've all been, somewhere totally ordinary, a parking lot at a busy shopping mall in Kampala. You know, it's a place for errands, for daily life. The most drama you usually expect is maybe struggling to find a decent parking spot. And then, just like that, everything changes. A heated argument boils over, a single gunshot echoes through the lot, and a young man named Kenneth Akena loses his life. That single moment kicks off a legal saga that would grip and honestly divide an entire nation for years. Let's just quickly walk through the timeline here so we can get our bearings. It all starts in November 2016 with the shooting and Kanyamunyu's arrest. 4 years later, November 2020, he pleads guilty, but to a lesser charge of manslaughter. Then, fast forward to April 2024, and he's released from prison, which, as you can imagine, kicked up a whole new storm of debate. See, this case was never just about a single crime. It's really about two profoundly different ideas of what justice even is. It's where modern, state-run law smashed right into ancient community tradition. And this slide right here breaks down those two competing ideas perfectly. On one hand, you've got the state's approach, what we call retributive justice. The goal here is simple: punishment. You broke the state's law, so you owe a debt to the state. But on the other side, you have the community's approach, restorative justice. And this is totally different. The focus here is on repairing the harm, on mending the relationships that were broken, and figuring out how to bring the offender back into the fold. Yeah, at the very heart of the community's approach in this case was a specific ritual called Mato Oput. It's a tradition from the Acholi people, and it literally translates to drinking the bitter herb. I mean, the name itself tells you everything, right? This is not supposed to be an easy process. It's a symbolic and very difficult journey to restore harmony after someone has been killed. So what does it actually involve? Well, it happens in 4 phases. First, and this is crucial, is truth-telling. The offender has to give a completely honest account of what they did. Second, they have to ask for and receive forgiveness from the victim's family. Third, there's compensation paid by the offender's family to the victim's family. And finally, it all culminates in a reconciliation ceremony where both families come together to seal the deal, to restore their relationship. Okay, so let's get back to the courtroom, because this is where things take a really wild turn. Right in the middle of this massive murder trial, Kanyamunyu's lawyers do something that nobody saw coming. And you have to understand, this wasn't some move they pulled before things got started. Oh no, the trial was well underway. The prosecution had already called 13 witnesses to the stand. The gears of the formal justice system were already grinding away. So what was this big, unprecedented request? Get this. They asked the judge to hit pause on the entire murder trial. Just stop everything. They wanted Kanyamunyu to be allowed to finish the Mato Oput ceremony. And their argument was that going through this traditional process would lead to a more meaningful plea bargain later on, and, beyond that, help heal some of the deep tribal wounds that the case had ripped open. I mean, can you imagine being that judge? What an incredible position to be in. His ruling was going to be a landmark, no matter what he decided, really digging into the intersection of law, policy, and just how far a judge's power can go. The entire legal headache really just boiled down to this one massive question. Should a modern court, with all its rules and procedures, literally stop what it's doing to wait for a traditional community ritual to finish? And Justice Stephen Mubiru's answer, wow, it was captured in this one powerful line from his ruling. He said, "Traditional justice can and should play a complementary role, but it cannot be used to displace, undermine, or delay the formal system." A very, very clear line in the sand. So why did he deny the request? Well, he laid out 4 key reasons. First, the right to a speedy trial. Any delay would be unfair to the other people accused in the case. Second, Mato Oput, for all its cultural importance, has no formal legal rules or safeguards. Third, he was worried it could set a dangerous precedent, a tactic people could use to just delay trials in the future. And finally, and this one is really interesting, he questioned whether a ritual designed for tight-knit communities could even properly apply to a crime between strangers in a big city. The bottom line here is that this ruling set a huge precedent, basically saying that when these two systems clash in an active trial, formal law comes first. And that was that. The decision was crystal clear. The request was denied. The judge ordered that the formal trial had to move forward. No delays. But of course, the story is far from over. Let's talk about the final act, this unsettled conclusion and the absolute firestorm of public reaction that came with it. So even though the judge said the trial had to proceed, behind the scenes, a plea bargain was still reached. And as you can see, the initial, very serious charge of murder was eventually dropped in favor of a conviction for the lesser crime of manslaughter.
For that manslaughter conviction, the court gave him a sentence of 5 years and 1 month in prison.
But, and this is a big but, that's not how much time he actually served. Because of remission, which is pretty standard for good behavior, the time he actually spent behind bars was closer to 3 years and 5 months.
And you can probably guess what happened next. His early release just threw gasoline on the fire. It reignited this furious public debate about privilege, about fairness, and about what justice actually means when you're powerful versus when you're an ordinary person. This whole ordeal left people wrestling with some really tough, profound questions. Did the system fail the victim's family? Can a plea bargain and early release ever really feel like justice? And how on earth do you balance the cold technicalities of the law with a family's very real, very raw grief?
Maybe the whole story is best summed up by this one observation from people who followed the case. Sometimes truth is messy, justice is imperfect, and the human cost is absolute. And that kind of leaves us with this final difficult thought to chew on. When you have two completely different ideas of what justice is, one about punishment, the other about healing, and they crash into each other over one tragic event, is it even possible to find a resolution that makes everyone feel like justice was served? I'm not so sure.